Just to give you a visual reference, these are the tools that I use to pull the subframe bushings. So it's definitely a lot simpler. This is the all-star tool here. If you can find one for cheap, this worked really well for both the trailing arm bushings and the subframe bushing. This carriage bolt is nice because it has a rounded head. And that's because when you're on top of the subframe, when you're on top of the bushing, it's kind of hard to get this in line with this. So it would kind of come in at an angle, but because this is rounded, there's a cup in there. It's nice to be able to kind of still push down even those at a slight angle. And then with these washers, at the very top, you're going to want bigger holes so it goes over this kind of square thing, because the 3/8, I don't know what size that is. The smaller one is going to get stuck there, so we wouldn't go all the way to the top. So get a couple of the bigger hole ones just to fill up to the, cover that up. And then you're going to want some of the bigger ones. This one's a bit thicker than this one. These two are the same size, but you want a washer big enough to kind of get the bulk of the subframe bushing, but not too big, or else you're going to get caught up in the dimple that's in the subframe. So this is a nice way to push that out. So this also, you definitely don't need one this long, because when this goes in, all you really need is just this kind of rounded part. You don't need all that sticking out. The first one I did use the pulling method with this whole thing, but after working with this tool right here, I found out on the right side I was able to push it out with just this tool. I did put this in just for this rounded head part. Just get like a short one. You could probably get like a 2-inch one, maybe a 3-inch, and then so you can get some space for all these washers. And then I used a pry bar and this wrench to kind of wedge into those two little channels to the side. That's what these two will grab onto. And because this isn't long enough, it wouldn't be able to reach down to the bottom of the subframe. So that's where the channels that are kind of the way it's made, that's where you wedge this pry bar, and I wedge this wrench in and on this end, and that's what it grabs onto here, because it wouldn't be able to reach all the way to the bottom. So the channels right in the middle is perfect, and that gives you enough space for this to basically drive the whole bushing out to the bottom. So this tool, awesome, and it's cheap. It's relatively cheap. You don't have to build a tool. You definitely, you still have to go to Home Depot and get this, but I went to the plumbing store and I tried to get one of those plumbing caps. They drilled a hole to the cap, and then the 3-inch piping or the nipple. I couldn't even find the piping, so I tried to piece this together. I found this, and I figured I can kind of screw this in here, and this just to kind of make that hole smaller. And then what I was originally going to do was kind of do this like that and pull the subframe into this cup, or the bushing into this cup. But this thing, this thing was expensive, and now I didn't even use it. Now I have this kind of sitting. If anybody wants it, let me know. That thing's heavy. But yeah, all you need really is this tool. Okay, so we've got that much space. In the back, the diff is lower just off the diff ear. On the right side, the bushing is giving a little bit of a play. here we go. Okay, so I got the left side bushing off. I originally went to the plumbing store and got like an end cap with a hole in it that was already in there, and I was going to use it with this 1/2 inch threaded, what is this? I forget what this is called. It's just it's a 1/2 inch rod, and I was just going to try to use this to suck it down into the cup that I was going to put here, but then I tried that. It seemed like this whole bearing thing it's not strong enough. It takes quite a bit of pressure, and I almost felt like I was going to break the nut, or the threads were going to be kind of jacked up. So then what I did was I put this on top and helped push this down from the top end while also pulling from the bottom end. So it's kind of a two-step method here. This is kind of nice in that it's rounded at the top. I couldn't quite get exactly straight down, and it was a bit of an angle, so it was nice that this is rounded. So that kind of worked perfectly. So what I would do is I tightened this as much as I could, and then once I added this, I started tightening from up here, pushing down just a little bit until it got really tight, and then that would push it just enough to loosen this up a little, and so I would tighten here, and then just kind of go back and forth, tightening as it goes down. The thing I like about this one, I saw some cheaper kits out there, but this is from Gear Wrench. This is the GW3533. This is part of a kit. I tried to find it individually, but the kit itself I think is like $90 on Amazon. I did find some cheaper $50 kits that looked the same, like they had all the same tie rod pullers. The thing I liked about this is this lip, this kind of biting area is very thin, and it's also kind of rounded there. This is totally worth it because you could do both the trailing arm bushings and the subframe bushings. I'm also going to try to use it for the front lower control arm bushings. I mean, this thing can basically do all three of the major bushings. The differential bushing, it looks pretty decent, so I'm going to leave that for now, but let's go ahead and try to pull this right bushing out. So first step, these big washers, this one is thicker. These two big ones are about the same size, but one is thinner and one is thicker, so I would get like the thicker one. It's stamped ASC, Alpha Sierra Charlie. Then this has the 1/2 inch opening maybe, and it's UDJ. If you go to Home Depot, this is a good size to pull out the subframe bushing. I am actually wondering if this is enough to push out the subframe bushing. This seems to be very strong, so I'm wondering if instead of doing the 2-part method, I'm gonna see if just this one part will work. Right now I just have this pry bar on that end, and I'm gonna wedge this wrench on the other end, and these are the 2 arms that I'm gonna pull up on with these 2. So this is just a test to see if it'll work with just one tool, and if that's the case and you can find this tool for like $25-30, then I think that's totally worth it. Instead of trying to fuss with trying to put together a kit and going to the plumbing store, getting one of those 3-inch caps and trying to get it drilled somewhere. I don't have a drill, so that's what I was kind of hesitant about. So I got that fitted. If this works, then this is the All-Star tool. So this is weird. It's a 16 mil. There you go. So yeah, I did loosen it up and kind of reposition it. I think that helps with some of the tension with this rubber. As it gets compressed, it starts to squeeze out, so I think it helps to loosen it up and redo it and re-straighten up the top. That works pretty nicely. No burning, save the environment. Yeah, this bushing doesn't look too bad. I got a little crack there, but doesn't seem that bad. But that worked out nicely. All right, so 2 subframe bushings are out, and so are the trailing arm bushings. Next up, I'm going to clean up all the bolts and just kind of clean up this area. Put a little bit of grease there so I can so it protects it from rust. And then the other thing I gotta do is this inner boot is torn. This one seems okay, so I'm just gonna kind of leave that. So instead of getting whole new axles, I'm just gonna replace the boot, which is cheap enough. After that, I'm gonna install the bushings and then put it all back in. I will say it's definitely easier to manage the subframe, just kind of going back and forth on the jack with the trailing arms off, because man, just lifting this up by itself, this is pretty heavy. So 2 of these on the subframe, I can imagine it would get a little unwieldy trying to balance it on the jack. So if you're in here, you might as well do the trailing arm bushings. So in that case, definitely remove the trailing arms. Also, the way I did it, I didn't disconnect the brake lines, so that's still good. E-cables, I was trying to take it out, but it doesn't seem to be pulling out from the channel, the tubes. I did disconnect it inside from the handle, but it just doesn't pull out from this end. So that's when I decided I'm just going to lower it, kind of twist it so it doesn't, there's plenty of slack here. If you do it this way, that means you don't have to loosen up the bolts inside. You don't even have to mess with it. So you don't have to remove the sway bar. You don't have to remove the drive line, the drive shaft from the diff. I think this method is probably the easiest in terms of not having to disconnect or make custom tools or what have you. So this seems to be a very non-destructive way of doing this whole job. So, all right. So the next step is just to clean everything up, clean up all the bolts, get it ready to install everything back in. The bottom one has these grooves for these dimples right here. So that goes in the bottom right there. Put on some grease. These are Ireland Engineering. I got these a few years ago and I never got around to installing it. So if I were to go now, I might get PowerFlex. These came with new top hats. This is the original and it's a little bit bigger. This whole top circle is a little bigger. So comes with these new ones, not top hats, but these are washers. I'm just going to use the 2 older ones just to use a C-clamp to get this fully seated. Here's the bolt. The washer goes on top and this gets seated inside. There's a groove. So for now, before we install this whole thing, I'm going to insert this first. So these bushings, some people have complained that the finishing isn't as nice. They said they noticed some bubbles, and I think I did notice some bubbles as well. Just this kind of, the way they cut this out, the inside isn't as fully polished, They cut it out, but then they just left it. They didn't like sand it to make it look nice. There's this like runoff on the bottom, and it's kind of preventing me from, here I'll show you, it's kind of preventing me from getting this bolt in. It's supposed to be clear, there's supposed to be metal showing, but this polyurethane material, the way they formed it, it just kind of glued over and they didn't finish it out. So I think people were saying there was a bad batch where they would just crumble, but I think that was way before that. So these are probably in the improved version. And I will say this is a lot easier to maneuver the whole subframe without the trailing arms attached. These trailing arms with the whole disc brakes and everything, and the hub and all of that, those are heavy. So I don't know the torque spec for this to the body, so we're just going tight AF. .22 mil at 107 foot-pounds. Also, the stud sticks below the nut, so I can't quite get the full. I need a deep socket. Otherwise, you just kind of put it on the end and do it. I don't know the torque specs for the hex nuts here for this bottom plate. I'm just gonna do finger tight or tight enough. This is a differential rear, 19 mil on both sides. This is 56 foot-pounds. Can't remember, but I think the bolt end goes this way. I can't get to the nut, so I'm just going to torque the bolt end.